Good to see you again. How's everyone doing? This has been really cool, huh? Thank you, whoever that was. Well, for those that I didn't get the opportunity to meet earlier, I'm Jake, and I'm a developer advocate at Figma. Advocates are practitioners that build value for the people that use our products internally. And I'm so excited to dive a bit deeper into the stuff that we looked at earlier this morning. But I want to start with a couple slides here. So whether you're using AI to create net new ideas or to efficiently translate between design and production, it's important to remember why we're doing any of this. This isn't just about moving faster, it's about going further. And while standing something up has never been easier, we all know that making something meaningful can be hard. We save time so that we can allocate it somewhere else. And for a lot of us here in the room today and watching at home, design is where we want to spend our time. Design exploration is an exercise in considering what could exist. Now, design systems support this pursuit from start to finish. Starting with what could exist, design systems help us avoid tunnel vision. Reusing existing components allows us to stay focused at a higher level and kind of blur out some of that tedium. Systems also allow us to do multi-threaded exploration, leveraging components in AI workflows to rapidly pursue many different options. And then we transition out of this what could exist into what should exist. This exploration becomes a refinement, and that's where we're pursuing this idea. And this is the critical point of design systems adoption. If our explorations are aligned with systems, we can easily align them to the system here. But good exploration benefits from the freedom to break out of those constraints, and that's where tools like check designs that we saw earlier leverage our systems to consolidate and distill our thoughts into a high-fidelity representation. And then, because our systems are also present in production, developers and their tools can more easily turn these representations into that working product. And this is where we land at what does exist. And systems help to ensure that it is both aligned to our original intent and efficiently brought into production. But even if you get to that right place eventually, how difficult was it to get there? Going from design representation through to production is a path optimization problem. And agentic coding tools can find the right things eventually. But how efficiently did they get there? How many premium LLM credits were expended along the way? How long did your developer wait? How confident are they that it's going to find the right thing? Figma's unique position is in knowing what you're trying to make and all the pieces required to make it to production, optimizing the way that agents land at the right code generation. And design systems, no surprise here, are a critical piece of design fidelity, but ensure that the path to those outcomes is done efficiently. And this has always been true of design systems for human-to-human communication, and that's now extended to the tools that we work with. But once we define all of that context, it can be massive, and sometimes accessing docs feels a little bit like this here, right? The Tesseract. Systems can be overwhelming for human compute, and the same is true of LLMs. So while documentation artifacts can be wonderful, especially for open source, onboarding around your system, or even training models, they can be really overwhelming to reference at the moment of implementation, and they can really take you out of your flow. Now, this movement away from reference and towards intelligence is not new. Did you know that in the English language, the word run has the most possible meanings? There are over 645 uses of run as a noun, verb, or adjective. And while documenting all of this is necessary, the last thing you want to do when writing a sentence on a deadline is to have to thumb through a dictionary. What folks have always wanted is the right answer right at their fingertips, right? In line as they write. And this is true in code with features like type ahead, but now also with things like code generation. Figma, like we talked about this morning, supports this in a few specific ways today. The first is variables and design tokens. These have very specific representations in code. We allow teams to provide that context to us so that we can convey it as code-based context precisely for LLMs. Code Connect allows you to document your components as well. We've supported this for almost a year and a half now, and teams utilize this to ensure that all of their kind of complex descendant trees and all of that are reflected really well with their frameworks of choice. We've seen an increase in demand for this type of representation as teams think about the presence of snippets like this as precise representation in AI workflows via our MCP server. And now, like we saw this morning, our additional Code Connect features help make creating these connections even easier. Connecting directly to your code base, you can link components to code in a few clicks. Using instructions with Figma's AI code generation, you can ensure that that right context is associated with your component library. And again, all of this context exists in Figma, not just so you can see it in Figma, but so we can deliver it to the tools that our developers are using. Like we said this morning, our position in these workflows is really unique. AI is better at writing code than we often give it credit for. The reason why they write the wrong code is because of a lack of context and instruction. Sounds familiar. Sounds like humans, too. Agentic coding tools provide access to code bases, which enables LLMs to write code that's aligned to the code base. But again, this is code that's already been written. It's based on patterns that already exist. Those things are often legacy code. What about new ideas? Well, that's where Figma comes in. New ideas are explored, refined, and defined on Figma's platform, backed by design systems. So product designs inside of Figma are essentially the best source of context that we can provide these tools. And design systems are the DNA that brings precision to that context. The model context protocol is that standard that allows for that delivery, and our MCP servers are the mechanisms that allow LLMs to access this very rich context that we have in our product designs. Design systems are such a critical piece of making all this magic happen. It's not just about writing code, it's about writing the right code in the right way, with the right configuration, using the right patterns. All right, let's take a peek at what this looks like in practice. This is going to look familiar to this morning, but we're going to go a bit deeper than we did earlier. So again, here's our design. We're going to be implementing the same kind of section over here. But like I said this morning, one of the easiest things for teams to adopt today is variables, even more so than component libraries. A lot of teams are using variables right now. And this is one of the best ways to quickly bring in code-based context to the existing systems you have. Chances are the way your developers are thinking about variable tokens is a little bit different. Maybe they add a prefix, maybe they change the case a little bit, hyphenation, whatever it is. So we want to make sure that that is present inside of Figma, so that we're not just trying to kind of like loosely convey this. We want to make sure that we're being very precise. How many folks have tried out code syntax for variables? Show of hands. We've got a couple. OK, this is cool. So check this out. We have our variables defined over here now. I'm still getting used to this. This is so cool, this side panel. But right inside of here, we have the ability to add custom code syntax representation of this variable. There's also a plugin API for this, so if you want to do this in bulk, you can do that as well. But we can also add that for Android and iOS distinctly. But right now, we have our CSS custom property here to represent that. Now, what's really cool is our plugin API already supports extended collections, right? So I've been able to write a plugin, which I can actually open up right here. This was actually critical in ensuring that we got to load all the pages. Here we go. I don't know how many of you built demo assets before, but it could be a little bit chaotic. And so this was actually crucial in our ability to create these demos for you today. I was able to use extended collections and write the right CSS that's just overriding for those sub-brands that we have with extended collections, including all those aliases. And I'm also able to bring in our text styles and more kind of like sophisticated, they're almost like mix-ins that I'm using on the CSS side. OK. So we're going to go back into dev mode here, and man, slots, I'm still getting used to how cool this is. Can we give a round of applause for slots? I'm like really stoked. Like this sort of thing you used to have to detach, right? If you wanted to govern your layout at like a pattern level, an abstraction level, you'd have to kind of create these fake components that everyone detaches and everyone knows it's kind of backwards, but you have to do it anyways. This allows us to kind of get this auto layout governed by a reusable abstraction and a component layer. And again, this is that Code Connect snippet that we were talking about earlier. So this is a deterministic representation of these components that we've published from our code base up to Figma and is associated with the components at a library level. So I've basically indicated to Figma that this is how I want field sets to be rendered. This is how I want their descendants to be rendered. And while this is like production UI representation, it's also not real, right? We want to fill this with real information in production, but we also want to make sure that all of our little distinct kind of like nuances are represented here, especially as we're telling an LLM what to do with the design. A lot of this is like stuff that Figma can't know on your behalf, right? You have to provide that context in order for us to deliver this appropriately. And that's just because of the subjectivity and relative decisions that your engineers make on the code base side. So we have that React representation, and now we have new ways to bring in Code Connect here, and that's through this new Code Connect UI that we were looking at earlier. This can give us all of, at a high level, all the instances that we have connected and not connected. And I have a snippet here that I'm gonna copy. And so this is where we're gonna be able to connect to our icon button component from the repo. Like I mentioned this morning, just having the right file a lot of times it's just the beginning, and especially as we think about other frameworks and different ways that people structure their code bases, we're really eager to support those as well as we can here, just to make sure that we're thinking in the same terms that your engineers are thinking. So in this case, we only have one component defined in this file, so there is only one available there. But if we had exported multiple components, we'd be able to select those from a list. And as we come over here, this is where Figma is able to generate a preview of what this code could look like. And we're going to have the ability to come in here and customize those instructions from our clipboard. But again, this is a perfect example of why this problem has been so difficult traditionally. Everything we just did here really quickly was made easier by Code Connect UI and all of these new features. And we've also allowed teams to do that with Code Connect for the past year and a half, more kind of deterministically by creating these templates, and that's still incredibly useful and valuable. Before all of that, every developer that touched your components had to think about this, right? This is all context that they needed to have to do this translation. And different developers have different levels of understanding of your systems, different levels of understanding of the front end. And sometimes your full stack engineer knows how to write front end, but that's not where their expertise lies. So this allows us to kind of take care of that at a library level for them, so that they don't have to spend any time making sure they're doing the right thing, and they can spend their time thinking at a high level about the actual UI they're implementing and all the other code that you have to write around the presentation layer. All right, so we can see that we've brought in our kind of custom shape, to this component instance. And again, we have the ability to change all of these values here. We can come in and swap this out for a different icon and see how that would end up updating this child instance of an icon right here. And at this point, we're going to go back and we're going to actually generate it in code and take a peek at MCP. So how many folks are familiar with MCP as a concept? We talked about it this morning. It's really cool, really exciting. You could do it for a ton of different things. The stuff we're going to be talking about today is using MCP to kind of write your design system's instances and code for you, using your design system with AI. But there's a lot more applications of this. Again, I showed you that plugin that I wrote for variables. I actually used AI to generate some of that. I used MCP to access the variables that were in the file. A lot of these components, I leveraged our MCP server to quickly scaffold so that we'd have a realistic library for you on the code side. You can also think of this MCP access as something that you can think of beyond just interface generation. If we're able to tell you how many components are connected, we're also able to tell you how ready for dev this is, how much new work might be required to implement it. You could use that information to create tasks, right, in task management software. You can do things to estimate roughly how long this feature is going to take to implement. There's a lot of different use cases that I think we're just getting used to as an industry for this level of access into this kind of information. It's really cool. And design systems are like one of those great things that allows us to actually put numbers on this stuff, right? What coverage looks like, what's going to take a ton of time, what new components need to be added, that sort of a thing. All right. So again, Figma's in the position of telling us how ready this thing is for dev. It's in the position of being able to tell us roughly how much context is going to be required to convey this information. And we're going to switch over to our code base here. Now, I don't know if anyone noticed that this morning, but centering in CSS is a lot easier than you might have last remembered. I think this is so cool. Display grid, place item center, that's all you need. I know that folks think CSS is hard. It's getting really cool, little CSS plug. But we're going to generate some CSS in here, some React in here. And I'm going to just hit the up arrow, and we'll kick off this process. Now, again, like I said this morning, we're using AI tools, so we want to make sure we're being clear. A huge part in the success of this workflow comes from my engineering expertise, right? And the engineers that you work with, the engineers in this room and watching across the world. Your ability to indicate to LLMs what to expect from Figma, what to do with it, right? That's like onboarding an engineer, right, onto your system, or onboarding a designer, a product designer that's utilizing your system. You want to be able to provide those instructions. You don't want to just say, use this component and this component. You also want to give them the understanding. Here's how we think about layout. Here's how we think about, different ways of referring to, variant naming conventions, those sorts of things. And so it's very important that as your engineers are thinking about UI generation, it's important that they're putting rules in their code base that interpret what Figma is providing via MCP the way that they want it to be, right? You don't want to just leave that stuff up to chance. And as design systems people, we know that you put in the work up front and then you benefit from it downstream 100 times. It's the same idea with these coding tools. So like I said earlier, we're calling 5 different tools. The get metadata one, I've actually pulled these out and so we can get some syntax highlighting and look at them. So I'm actually going to hide Copilot, which has already done the job at this point. But this is that get metadata tool on our MCP server. It returns instances, frames, text nodes, their IDs, as well as their names and rough positions. The best way to think about this is an LLM can now interpret this and then dig in to specific frames by ID and go get a screenshot of them. Go get more detailed design systems context. You can imagine if this was a much larger selection, an agent now has the autonomy to explore the file with this level of information. If we were conveying everything here, that would be a little overwhelming, but this allows these agents to kind of like utilize this on their own terms. So then get screenshot, big surprise here. We get image data. That's what that tool returns. We also have get code connect map. So this returns kind of which components are relevant. In this case, we access the get remote. So we know what the full URL link is to the files that are relevant. Here's that React representation, what the import statements look like, what the label of this is. So we have that, and now this is just scoped to just the components that are in that selection that we currently have selected in Figma. Get variable defs. This is actually really interesting. So if you're an engineer and you're implementing front end, you don't really care about these alias chains that have been set up behind the scenes. You really care about what token is currently being used. That's all I need to know to implement this properly. My design system is governing what it becomes on different devices and all of that. And so get variable defs specifically is not meant for building out your variables collections. It's meant for the developers that are tasked with implementing the design. What do they need? And so that's what we're seeing right here. And then last but not least, and text styles are also in there, so you can write rules and say, hey, when you see this text style, do this thing with it. And last but not least, we have get design context, which returns a React and Tailwind representation. LLMs are trained on a lot of React and Tailwind, so we're able to convey the overall layout in those terms, but then also specifically call out components, right? And so this is the code syntax in line, right? And so our teams have the ability to kind of like call this stuff out in their rules as well. Now, no surprise to anyone, we wrote the right code again, so I'm going to go ahead and keep this. And when we refresh our thing, again, this is using all of the right data layer, right? It's implementing our front end the right way. This should allow our engineer counterparts to stay focused at that higher level about the general thing we're doing at a high level, as opposed to getting lost in just trying to make sure we use the right thing, right? All right. I think this is so cool. I still think it's cool. I've been talking about it forever. And let's move on to the rest of this demo. OK. I'm going to switch slides. There we go. So because we aligned our design system between Figma and code, right? That's the work that we're doing every day. And because we've provided that context to Figma to deliver, these sorts of outcomes are really, really special and have been the dream from the beginning with design systems. This isn't just about the quality of our output. It's about the efficiency of how we get there and the reduction in cost that's associated with that. Code Connect, like we said, is the best way to bring that code base into Figma. And now you have easier ways to do that and connect to your code base through our GitHub authentication and integration there. This is available on Oregon Enterprise plans today. And then we're officially taking our local and remote MCP servers out of beta and into GA. Now, we still have a ton of work to do here, but by moving it into GA, we're signaling that this is a technology we are really excited about and committed to. We're really eager to hear what other use cases you have beyond just what we demonstrated today. So give us your feedback as you play and as you learn and as you push forward the future of product development. There's so much more to come here. Last slide. Remember, your expertise and your systems are the context that makes the biggest difference in these workflows. That's your effort and your labor. Your investment in systems and our efforts to support you in that have never been more relevant than they are today. It's really exciting to see all of this validated by these new workflows, all these principles and practices that you've spent so much time and energy advocating for in product development. That's special. All right. Thank you all so much.